I'm here today to lay out additional public health measures which we have concluded are necessary to protect our healthcare system and to save lives. Through most of the past 9 months, Albertans have done an admirable job of rising to the challenge of COVID-19. Despite all of the pressures that we have faced together, we managed to get through most of this tough year with lower relative levels of COVID infections, hospitalizations, and fatalities than the other large Canadian provinces, all the US states, and pretty much all of the European countries. And we did that with a lighter hand on job-killing restrictions, while also coping with the hardest hit Canadian economy due to the energy price collapse on top of the global COVID recession. And we did it while leading Canada in pandemic response, from personal protective equipment that we were able to share with the rest of the country, to the highest levels of testing, to the fastest and smartest use of technology, and much more. Let's not forget that the NHL recognized Alberta's leadership by choosing Edmonton as the center for the NHL playoffs of dozens of cities across North America. But having said that, we all know that the last few weeks have been a different story. Like nearly every developed society in the Northern Hemisphere this fall, we're experiencing a surge in cases, in hospitalizations, and most sadly, of deaths, as cold weather has caused people to move indoors and the virus to spread more quickly. Now we have 654 people coping with COVID-19 in our hospitals, including 112 in intensive care units. That number has grown by 600% since the last week of October. 640 Albertans have now passed away from COVID-19. To all of those who have lost loved ones, please know that Albertans grieve with you for your loss. The growing pressure on Alberta's healthcare system has been met by the amazing professionalism and dedication of our world-class nurses, doctors, and other healthcare workers. Today and every day, we thank them, especially in some of our largest urban hospitals who have been working under growing stress. To respond to the growth in COVID hospitalizations, we've had to cancel, sadly, thousands of surgeries and postpone or cancel thousands of other medical procedures. And just pause to think about this for a second, because for every one of those people affected, this means anxiety, stress, sometimes it means real physical pain and suffering as their health deteriorates. For some Albertans, delaying their health care will tragically mean a shorter lifespan. If we do not succeed in bending down the curve, we will see these hospitalization numbers continue to increase. And that's not the conclusion of some theoretical model. It is the hard mathematical reality of the exponential spread of this virus. That means more canceled surgeries, more delayed healthcare, more strain on our emergency and intensive care wards. It means more deaths, especially amongst our most elderly and vulnerable. That is why Alberta's government, on the advice of the Chief Medical Officer, has layered on a growing number of public health guidelines and restrictions over recent weeks. In the last month, we've put in place significant new measures, including a complete ban on indoor social activity, the closure of group sport, fitness, and cultural activities, the closure of thousands of businesses, the imposition of capacity limits on retail businesses, curfews on bars and restaurants, plus limitations on who they can serve, strict limits on how many people can attend funerals, weddings, worship services, and much more. Those of us in government who frankly have secure paychecks can too easily make the mistake of thinking of these policies as abstractions. It's too easy to think of them as just words on a piece of paper, or to think of social and economic activity, in other words, to think of our lives together as a community, as some kind of a switch that the government can just flick on and off at will. But behind every one of these restrictions lie crushed dreams and terrible adversity, life savings, years of work, hopes and dreams that are suddenly undone due to no fault of brave Albertans who have taken the risk to start businesses, to create jobs. Constitutionally protected rights and freedoms that are being suspended and abridged are the consequence of many of these measures. Jobs and livelihoods that are being lost. The sacrifices have been real. The mental, emotional, and health consequences of these decisions are devastating, and leaders should not turn away from admitting that, to contemplating that, and to balancing that off against the public health imperative, because these devastating impacts for many will be long-lasting. I also understand that to many people, these policies, these restrictions seem unjust. I've made no secret of the fact that Alberta's government has been reluctant to use extraordinary powers to damage or destroy livelihoods in this way. It is why we have stressed education, together with personal and collective responsibility from the very beginning. And it's why we've tried to balance the protection of lives and livelihoods rather than resorting to damaging measures as a first resort. Alberta's government has carefully regarded every relevant bit of data, believe me, and every reasonable argument, of which there have been many. We know that many restrictions create their own negative mental, emotional, and other health effects. But we also know that while our healthcare system is under growing stress, we have the capacity to, if stretched, to treat more than 2,000 COVID patients in hospital beds and hundreds in intensive care. But hear this, we also know that creating that additional COVID capacity in our hospitals will have a catastrophic impact on the health of thousands of Albertans as their surgeries and other care is canceled or postponed indefinitely. We know that if we allow viral spread at current growth rates, we will eventually run out of hospital capacity. That is not an opinion, it is a fact. If you think that's exaggerated, then just look at what's happened in several US states south of the border to see the tragic reality of uncontrolled growth in this virus. Finally, if stronger action is not taken now, we know that hundreds or potentially thousands more Albertans could die. We cannot let that happen. We will not let that happen. We must act to protect lives, and we must act to protect our hospitals, plus those who depend on them. We've not yet been able to see the full impact of the most recent round of restrictions. The good news, if there is any in all of this, is that the rate of growth as measured by the rate of transmission and the positivity rate on tests appears largely to have stabilized. But that is not nearly good enough, as new cases, hospitalizations, and fatalities continue to grow at an alarming rate. And that is why Alberta's COVID Cabinet Committee met for several hours yesterday to review the latest data and to receive the Chief Medical Officer's most recent recommendations. After careful deliberation, we've adopted the following additional measures. First, on November 27, 2 weeks ago, we placed restrictions on all indoor gatherings of no social gatherings indoors, plus a limit of 10 people for outdoor gatherings. But as of today, we are banning all outdoor social gatherings, period. Also, effectively, immediately, we are expanding the mask mandate to apply to all indoor places and indoor workplaces throughout the province, with an exception for farm operations and people who live in rental homes. As we've said since the beginning, masks can be an effective tool in reducing transmission. The vast majority of Albertans have done the responsible thing through voluntary use of face coverings, and we see that increasingly across the province. But we are at a point where everyone has a civic duty to do their part. The following public health orders will be effective as of December 13th at 12:01 a.m. Firstly, retail services must limit their shoppers to 15% of fire code capacity, down from the current 25%. This will apply to retail stores and grocery stores, but also to shopping malls. Food court kiosks can remain open, but only for takeaway service. We will provide shopping malls with additional guidance, but the bottom line is this: malls must be limited to commercial visits by customers, not be used as a place to hang out or socialize with friends. Secondly, in-person attendance at places of worship is also being reduced to 15% of the fire code occupancy. Mandatory use of masks, physical distancing, the prohibition on related post-worship social activities, and other restrictions will continue to apply. Where they can, faith communities are encouraged to move to online or drive-in services, and these measures continue to reflect Alberta's best effort to balance enumerated constitutional rights with the critical life-saving public health imperative. All restaurants, bars, lounges, and cafes will move to takeout or delivery service only. And let me pause to say that since the most recent restrictions, the curfew, the limitation to household groups, many restaurant and similar operations have told us that they've closed because they cannot pay their own bills right now. This will allow them to fully access federal supports and provincial supports as we get through the difficult following weeks. A number of services will also be closed for the duration of these measures. That includes entertainment facilities, places like casinos, bingos, raceways, libraries, museums, theaters, and private clubs will be closed. Trade shows and conference centers will be closed. Indoor recreation facilities, including fitness centers, gyms, pools, and skating rinks will be closed, as will personal and wellness services, which include salons, barbers, nail salons, massage, tattoo, and piercing studios. It is important to note that allied health services like physio, dentistry, social services, emergency shelters, and childcare will remain open as previously outlined. This importantly includes addiction counseling and group meetings, as well as residential addiction treatment centers. Some outdoor recreation sites may continue, such as outdoor skating rinks and ski hills. Alberta Health will work with operators to develop plans to avoid crowding and maintain safety measures. Hotels can also remain open, but will have to close pools, fitness centers, related services, and restaurants. And finally, we are announcing, and this is very important, we are announcing that all Alberta employees must work from home unless an employer requires a physical presence for operational effectiveness. This is moving from a recommendation from 2 weeks ago to a legal requirement as of this Saturday. There are no further changes to schools beyond what was announced on November 27th. So that basically means that K-6 students will remain in their classes until the Christmas break, and grades 7 to 12 will continue to work from home. Masking requirements have not changed for schools, nor has the January 11th date for resumption of in-person learning. Once again, these new restrictions are effective this coming Saturday at midnight, that is to say December 13th at 12:01 a.m., 4 days from now. This gives businesses time to prepare for an orderly adoption of these public health orders. These measures will be in effect for at least 4 weeks, and they will apply province-wide. It has always been our preference to take a regionally targeted approach, but we have concluded, regrettably, that that is not a viable option right now. In fact, 97% of Albertans live today in a local geographic area with more than 50 active COVID cases per 100,000 population, and that was our key threshold. The virus is spreading at an alarming rate in every region of the province, and many of those who fall ill in rural areas do end up being cared for in the increasingly hard-pressed large urban hospitals. So the bottom line is that we must have a coordinated province-wide approach now. 4 weeks from now, we will assess our progress, and if we can safely return to less stringent restrictions in areas of lower transmission, we'll happily do so then. Let me say a word about Christmas. For many of us, I suspect for most Albertans, Christmas is the most important time of the year. It's the symbolic heart of family life and of treasured memories. And Lord knows we all need the loving presence of family and friends at the end of this terrible year now more than ever. But here is the hard truth. Clearly, the biggest single source of viral transmission is at home gatherings. It's when we let our guard down. It's when we relax with people that we are close to. And it's when transmission most easily happens. And so if we relax the public health measures to permit large family gatherings in just 3 weeks' time, we will, without a shadow of a doubt, see a large increase in hospitalizations and fatalities. We simply cannot let this Christmas turn into a tragedy for many families. And so with great reluctance, we are asking Albertans to limit their holiday gatherings to the members of their household or to too close contacts for people who live by themselves. Before I close, I know how devastating today's announcement and these measures are for tens of thousands of small business owners who have been coping through an impossibly difficult year, for hundreds of thousands of their employees and so many others who have found themselves without work. Let me say, this is not their fault. This isn't the fault of any business operator or employee who so carefully followed the guidelines. The truth is this, that until our contact tracing system was overwhelmed about 3 weeks ago, we saw very small traceable cases to the hospitality industry. We saw none since June in casinos that employ thousands of people. We saw none in hair salons. And 2 weeks ago, I thanked operators like those for the great care that they have taken for their staff and clients. But we are now at a place where viral transmission is so widespread in the community that it does not any longer matter how careful business operators are, because community transmission means that staff and clients, the general public, represent a risk of transmission. We are now at a point where we simply must take these, frankly, dramatic measures to reduce general social interaction. It's the only way we can get on top of this and to prevent a doubling and then a doubling again of the demands on our healthcare system to a point that would become unsustainable. So these are decisions that we have arrived at not as a first resort, but as a last resort to protect lives and to preserve our healthcare system. Having said that, we recognize that the very real impact this will have on so many employers, on jobs, on small and medium-sized businesses in particular. And so our cabinet has also decided massively to expand urgent financial support, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises. We are tripling immediately the small and medium enterprise relaunch grant from $5,000. Actually, we're quadrupling it to $20,000, while at the same time lowering the eligibility threshold to qualify for the grant from 40% of revenues lost to 30%. We're also making this retroactive to March, and this brings the Alberta government's total COVID direct relief for Alberta businesses to over $1 billion, in addition to significant federal support for businesses that have been forced to suspend their operations. Minister Schweitzer will go into further details. Let me just close by thanking Albertans for their patience, their forbearance, and their care. Through most of the past 9 months, Albertans have risen to the challenge in phenomenal ways. We now have the very real prospect of the vaccination program beginning within weeks, which demonstrates that the end of all of this is within sight. So let's hang in there together until we can get to that better day and we can return Alberta to a free and prosperous society that we know and love. With that, I will invite Minister Tyler Shandro to provide further details on today's public health measures.
Thank you very much, Premier. Today, we're taking decisive action to reduce the spread of COVID in our communities. Alberta's case numbers and hospitalizations have reached a point where we must take more strict measures to protect capacity within our healthcare system. The goal of these restrictions is to further limit in-person interaction and minimize exposure to the virus. This will help us bend the curve and reduce the strain on our healthcare system. The details I'm going to outline, well, Premier outlined these measures. I will go through them in more specific detail. And I would note as well that these details are also available on our COVID website. And I encourage all of you to visit the site to learn more about these measures. Effective immediately across the province, no indoor or outdoor social gatherings are permitted, public or private. All in-person gatherings, indoor and outdoor, must be limited to those in the same household. Albertans living alone may continue to have up to 2 non-household close contacts, but these must be the same 2 individuals since this rule was first put in place on November 24th. I want to note that the restriction on gatherings doesn't apply to co-parenting arrangements or service visits from family caregivers or healthcare or childcare providers. However, those visits must be limited to their intended purpose and not be of a social nature. Also effective today, the mandatory indoor public masking requirement is extended across the province. This requirement applies to all public spaces, indoor workplaces, and facilities outside the home. It applies to all employees, visitors, and the general public as well. The only exception for the masking mandate is, as Premier said, farm operations and rental accommodations. There are no changes to the masking requirements to students in our schools. Now, turning to workplaces, mandatory work from home measures will be implemented across Alberta, effective at 12 a.m. December 13th. That is starting 12 a.m. Sunday morning. All staff must work from home unless employers determine that a physical presence is required for operational effectiveness. Employers should find ways for as many of their employees as possible to do their job from home. We know this will be challenging for some employers, but it's an important part of limiting the rising spread of COVID in our communities. Also effective at 12 a.m. Sunday, and that is 12 a.m. midnight Saturday, Sunday morning, December 13th, retail services can remain open but must limit their customer capacity to 15% of fire code capacity, occupancy, I should say. Stores will be allowed to a minimum of 5 people. Curbside pickup and delivery options are strongly encouraged for those who can use them. This will help minimize lineups and reduce wait times for everyone. Where possible, we're encouraging all Albertans to use online services and options. This includes food and retail services. Shopping malls may remain open, but are also limited to 15% of their fire code occupancy. Food courts will be takeout only. As Premier noted, places of worship are limited to 15% of fire code occupancy for in-person attendance, and all public health guidance must be followed. Virtual services are strongly recommended to avoid in-person interaction. Drive-in services, where attendees do not leave their vehicles, are still allowed. This measure is also effective from 12 a.m. Sunday, December 13th. The following closures are province-wide and will be in effect as well, 12 a.m. Sunday, December 13th. All restaurants, pubs, bars, lounges, and cafes will be closed to in-person service. Only takeout, drive-through, and delivery services are permitted. Also closed are the following businesses and services: casinos, bingo halls, gaming and racing entertainment centers, horse tracks, bowling alleys, pool halls, legions, private clubs, and nightclubs. Personal and wellness services, including hair and nail salons, massage, tattoos, and piercing, and as well, all recreational facilities, and that includes fitness centers, rec centers, pools, spas, gyms, studios, day and overnight camps, indoor rinks, I should say, and arenas, and community halls. Libraries as well, science centers, interpretive centers, museums, galleries, amusement parks, and water parks, and as well, all trade shows, conference centers, and banquet halls across the province. That's the list of closures. Outdoor rinks and downhill ski hills will be permitted to stay open if public health measures are followed. Hotels may remain open and offer room service for guests, but they cannot provide in-person dining or allow access to spas or pools. To ensure people have access to vital supports, the following services will remain open for in-person attendance: health services, including physiotherapy or acupuncture, emergency services, social or protective services, and shelters for vulnerable people, childcare, not-for-profit community kitchens, soup kitchens, and religious kitchens. A reminder as well that there are also closures that remain in effect from November 27th, including community halls and centers, indoor children's play centers, indoor playgrounds, theaters, auditoriums, concert halls, and community theaters, nightclubs, banquet halls, and conference centers, indoor and outdoor festivals, concerts with the exception of drive-in events, trade shows, and as well sporting events or competitions. Now, know that this is a lot of information to digest all at once. And I recognize that all of the measures that we are implementing, the ban on social gatherings of any kind is likely the most challenging one for people to accept, especially as we approach the holidays. But it is necessary to protect lives, to protect livelihoods, and to protect as well our healthcare system for all Albertans. In-person interactions, especially those in social settings, continue to be a significant source of spread and are fueling the surge in cases that we've been experiencing here in Alberta. We need to stop as much person-to-person exposure as we possibly can. So in addition to not having any social gatherings, it means being extra aware of your surroundings and not getting too close to folks in the grocery store or when you're out for a walk. We've already proven earlier this year that we have what it takes as Albertans to embrace the challenge of changing our behavior and looking out for one another. And I know that we can do it again this fall and winter. So thank you very much, and I will now invite Minister Schweitzer to the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Shandu, and thank you, Premier. I'm here to talk about the supports that we're going to be providing to small businesses across Alberta impacted by these new health measures here in the province of Alberta. And I want this to sink into everybody that's at home today, the extent of these measures and the impacts that it's going to have on your friends, your neighbors, your local community. It's not lost on any of us the impacts that this is going to have. Many of my friends are trainers, they're barbers, they're your hairdresser, these are your friends. They're in your community and they're impacted here today because many of us decided that we could ignore health orders. We could not stay away from each other. So I'm asking each and every one of you that may not like these new health orders, that may not want to do this, to think about every single person in your community that is impacted, in a dramatic way here today by being shut down, by their businesses being closed today by the hand of government. So you need to think about them every single time. Over the holidays, Christmas, all of us, we're in this thing together. You have to be there to support your local small businesses because they matter to all of us. They matter to the fabric of our communities. Hundreds of thousands of Albertans work for these small businesses in each and every one of our communities across Alberta, and they are impacted here today. We have reports saying that 40% of these small businesses may not be able to turn the lights back on if we don't provide them with supports. That's the extent of what we're facing here in our province. 40% may not come back unless we step in and provide them with supports now. So that's why the Premier, our cabinet, last night met as a team to figure out how we could support them to get them through to the other side. How do we support them now to make sure that they're ready when we come out with the vaccine, hopefully in a few weeks here, to get people starting to get that safety in our communities, to help get that to the goal line. So that's why we're launching an additional relaunch grant here today. So small businesses can qualify for up to $20,000 overall. So there's $5,000 that we launched in the spring. We're doing another $15,000 now. If you didn't apply in the spring, you can still apply for the full $20,000 here today. And we're lowering the eligibility. Initially, it was a 50% decrease in your revenues to qualify. Now we're lowering it to 30,000. We had 17,000 small businesses qualify in the first round. By lowering this threshold, an additional 15,000 businesses will qualify. So this is over 30,000 businesses should qualify for this additional supports. This is up to $500 million of supports that we're providing to small businesses so that they can survive through this and come out the other end. This, along with federal supports, additional provincial supports that we've provided. At the provincial level alone, it's over $1 billion of supports for small businesses because we need them. And again, I just want to reiterate the list that our health minister and the Premier have articulated. Let that sink in. And again, when you're thinking about these measures in your communities, think about your barber. Think about the person that provides services to your kids. So many of us, we've got to go home and provide disappointing news to our kids at home as well. And we know that the frustration is there. But all of us over the next month need to do this. We need to make sure that we work together so we can come out of this on the other end and have these small businesses be successful. So again, just encourage every Albertan, listen to these health measures, take them seriously. We know it's been long. There's light at the end of the tunnel. The vaccine's almost here. We're gonna make sure we get that distributed in the most efficient way possible. So again, work with us and work and support those small businesses out the other end. And for the small businesses that can continue to operate, do everything you can. Do takeout. Do everything that you can to support them. We've lowered retail, but you have to be patient when you get in there. But make sure you continue to support them through this winter season and through Christmas. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Hinshaw. Oh, sorry. Just one thing to clarify. The threshold removed was from 50% down to 30% is the threshold of eligibility, and the grant is up to $20,000 overall.
Thank you, Minister. And good afternoon, everyone. Over the last 24 hours, we have identified 1,727 new cases of COVID-19 in Alberta and completed more than 19,000 tests. In schools, there are currently active alerts or outbreaks in 426 schools, or about 18% of all schools in the province. Currently, these schools have a combined total of 1,701 active cases. This number includes 108 schools currently on the watch list. As the Premier noted, there are 654 people in hospital with COVID-19, including 112 who have been admitted into the ICU. This includes 357 COVID patients in Edmonton hospitals alone, with 66 in the ICU. As you know, in late October, Edmonton Zone postponed approximately 30% of non-urgent scheduled surgeries in order to respond to rising hospitalizations and ICU admissions. The Royal Alexandra Hospital is currently providing care for 102 COVID-19 patients. With 13 units on outbreak or watch, the site has decided to place the entire facility on watch status. This is a precautionary measure which brings enhanced measures to every unit not on an outbreak. Our hospitals, including the Royal Alex, continue to be safe places to receive care, but I know that staff and physicians are working under incredible stress. Today, the Edmonton Zone will also enact additional measures. These will help ensure there is space to care for the critically ill patients who require care, both now and in the coming weeks. These additional measures include postponing as much as 60% of non-urgent scheduled surgeries that require a hospital stay. Surgeries will continue for major and minor trauma, urgent cancer, cardiac, and vascular cases. Diagnostic imaging or other clinical support services could be reduced by as much as 40%. Ambulatory visits and procedures will also be reduced as needed to support the rising demands we are seeing. AHS will be in touch with anyone whose surgery or appointment is affected by these changes. These steps are yet another reminder of why today's restrictions are needed and how COVID-19's impact reaches far beyond those who test positive. Sadly, there were also 9 deaths related to COVID-19 reported to us in the past 24 hours. I want to express my condolences to anyone who is mourning the loss of a loved one to COVID-19 or any other cause. This has been a long year for all of us. For more than 9 months, I have provided regular numbers and statistics of the virus and how it is spreading. It is easy to lose track of the big picture. Today, I think it's important to highlight the impact that COVID-19 has had on the province. Since the first case was confirmed on March 5th, more than 72,000 Albertans have been diagnosed with this virus. This includes more than 20,000 who are actively infected at this moment. If you gathered everyone who has been diagnosed with COVID-19 together, it would be the 5th largest city in Alberta. 1 in 3 people have now been tested at least once, and we are approaching 2.4 million tests done. 2 months ago, on October 8th, our positivity rate was just 1.34%, and we had just 184 new cases across the province. Today, our positivity rate is 9.41%, and our 7-day average of new cases is 1,785. There have been outbreaks in almost every type of group setting: parties, family dinners, sports cohorts, long-term care facilities, schools, hospitals, workplaces, and supportive living facilities, just to name some examples. We have seen the virus touch every region and every age group. Our youngest reported case was less than 1 year old, and our oldest was 108. Many of those who've recovered have faced lingering side effects and serious outcomes. Most tragic of all are the 640 lives that have now been lost to this virus. Every case is a person, and every hospital or ICU admission is a patient who needed care. We are all at risk of COVID-19. We are all impacted by the toll it is taking on our health system. I know that the restrictions announced today will have a significant impact on the lives of many Albertans, all of whom have already faced a very challenging year. I also know that we all want to move to a time when restrictions are not necessary and our health system is not at risk. The quickest path to getting there is by all of us embracing these restrictions for at least the next 4 weeks. I know it is hard, but I ask you to be diligent, to be patient, and to keep going. I urge all Albertans to focus on how you can fully embrace the details and the spirit of these restrictions. We need to go above and beyond to keep ourselves, our families, and our communities safe. It is going to take each and every one of us doing everything we can to bend the curve and reduce the strain on our healthcare system. I want to thank Albertans for the sacrifices you have made over the last 10 months. I know the vast majority have worked incredibly hard to protect each other. Today, we are asking you to do even more, and while that may feel overwhelming, it is what needs to be done. There is no other option, but we are all in this together, and we will get through this together. Thank you, and we're happy to take questions.
A reminder to those on the line that we have a lot of you in the queue, so please be brief and limit yourself to one question. Operator, can you please put through the first caller?
Our first question comes from David Staples of the Edmonton Journal. Your line is open.
Hello, Premier, Ministers, and Dr. Hinshaw. I'm just wondering about we've had 2 rounds of regulation go in most recently, and neither of them have slowed transmission. I'm wondering if you think this time these measures are significant enough to finally work and bend the curve. And if they are we trying to get to COVID zero where we have no cases, or is the idea just to get the hospitals back on track and go from there?
I'll maybe start with that, and then if others want to comment. To them. This round of restrictions is the most significant that we have introduced so far, and I believe that this round of restrictions, which again is intended to reduce the number of close contacts that people have with each other, will help us in bringing our numbers down. We know when we've seen other jurisdictions, we can look at, for example, Israel, which had a significant outbreak earlier this fall. And with the restrictions that they put in place, they actually were able to bring the curve down faster than they did in the first wave. And I think that this comprehensive measure that's going into place today across the province really emphasizes that when we all work together, we all follow these restrictions, we can bring the numbers down. The target is not 0 COVID cases, but we must get our cases low enough that we are not going to be putting the health system at risk. And I'll turn it over to see if others want to comment.
Thanks, David. I would just add that, as I mentioned in my remarks, we have not yet had a chance fully to assess the impact of the most recent round of restrictions that were announced 2 weeks ago today. The first of those took immediate effect, which was the mandatory ban on indoor social gatherings, which, as we know, is a major area of transmission. But the business restrictions, limitations on retail capacity, the family cohort limitation at in hospitality businesses, and many other restrictions did not apply until 10 days ago. And so we haven't had a chance to fully see the impact of that. If there is some solace to take in where we stand now, it's that we appear to have seen a stabilization in the rate of growth. That is to say that the estimated rate of transmission seems to be bouncing around just below 1.2 province-wide, and the positivity rate seems to have stabilized in the 8 to 9% range. Now, that's not, we're long from anything really substantial to celebrate in that, except at least if you can stop the constant increase in the growth rate, then that is some good news. And so hopefully when those measures from 2 weeks ago have their full impact, layered onto it these much more stringent measures announced today, we believe on the best advice that we are getting that it will have a very meaningful impact. I'll restate what we've said from the beginning, which is that we're not chasing zero. What we are seeking to do is to maintain the capacity of the healthcare system and at the same time minimize the damage to our broader society of restrictions. That continues to be our balanced goal.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Our next question comes from Jeff Black of 660 News. Your line is open.
Hi there, Premier. Why introduce these measures now? We had an opportunity to do this 2 weeks ago. So why not try to do these restrictions from those 2 weeks ago? And do you think that it's going to work this time?
Well, I just answered that question. This is the best advice we have. These are measures that are going further to reduce social contact amongst people as long as Albertans respond. And I think all of this collectively, layered on top of everything else, not only sends a strong message, but will significantly reduce the number of potential transmissions in our society. We have continued to take more and more aggressive measures, both recommendations on the voluntary side and restrictions. Our approach has been to look, I'll just back up a step and say that we acknowledge that every restriction creates damage. Every restriction, like the ones that we are announcing today, will impose enormous damage on the lives and livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of Albertans. This is not academic. This is very real. People will lose their life savings as a result of this. The CFIB, as Minister Schweitzer alluded to, is their members have been surveyed indicating that as many as 40% of the small businesses in this province might not recover from another forced shutdown. That's tens and tens of thousands of families and hundreds of thousands of people who work for them. So why didn't we do this earlier? Because we have sought to limit the damage on our broader society. For every one of those people who loses their business, their life savings, their job, their prospects for the future, there is a risk of emotional and mental health challenges. For some, potentially addictions challenges, all of which also have their own downstream physical health consequences. One of the problems in the COVID era is we don't have a proper way of measuring that or projecting that. We can measure how many positive test results we get. We can measure how many COVID-19 patients are in the hospital, but we can't measure the broader downstream effects of restrictions. And that's why we have approached that with great caution, not as a first resort, but as a last resort.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Our next question comes from Tyler Dawson of the National Post. Your line is open.
Hi, I just wanted to ask about retail and what the thought process was in keeping retail open to allow people sort of in store as opposed to just opting for something like curbside pickup.
Sure. Thank you, Tyler. Well, while we encourage curbside pickup, we acknowledge that people cannot live without purchasing basic goods like groceries and some other some other household necessities. So even those societies that have had the most stringent lockdown style policies have obviously allowed for the continued operation of at least some retail businesses. Now, we sought to do that in the spring by creating what turned out to be I think, a foolhardy invention, which was a designation between essential and non-essential businesses, which effectively meant that we pushed the population to big box retailers that we categorized as being essential because they had food or pharma. And that effectively meant that the Walmarts and the Costcos of the world made a killing, while small and medium-sized owner-operated Alberta businesses were devastated, losing their market share, when they could have operated just as safely as a Walmart or a Costco. I mean, in the spring, we had this crazy situation of hundreds of people jamming into big US-owned box stores, often buying goods that would normally be available from small specialty retailers in Alberta. And those small businesses could very easily have done what we're asking them to do now, which is to follow all the public health guidelines very carefully, to limit the number of customers permitted in. And so we've decided not to make that mistake a second time, to learn from that mistake. Well, the problem now is general social and community transmission as opposed to any particular kind of business. If we have to allow people to buy things, then I do not think we should discriminate between different kinds of retail operators. And finally, I'll just say this: every business is essential for the person who owns that business and the people who work there. And that's something we should not lose sight of again.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Our next question comes from Dean Bennett of the Canadian Press. Your line is open.
Hi, it's probably a question for maybe the Premier or Minister Chandro. Can you explain exactly how this outdoor gathering ban is going to work? So, for example, there can't be more than 10 people on the street at the time. What if I'm out with 12 of my friends on an ice skating rink? Well, that's allowed, but then that's also banned at the same time. Also, how are you going to enforce that?
Thanks, Dean. So first of all, let's remember that this is about social gatherings, and what we're trying to do is change the behavior of Albertans to reduce their social interactions. So what's being prohibited is we're asking Albertans to not socially gather, same as we've asked them in the past to not socially gather indoors, now to not do it outdoors. So it's not a matter of people bumping into each other in the street. It's a matter of people making the decision to gather socially outdoors. If they decided to do it on a sidewalk or, in North Glenmore Park, it's going to be that kind of a situation. When it comes to enforcement, look, it's going to be the same difficulty that we've had throughout the pandemic, and every jurisdiction has had the same difficulty throughout the pandemic, and how public health measures related to COVID can be enforced. Obviously, enforcement is one of the tools to be able to change people's behavior. Education is sometimes used as well as intervention and prevention by our public health folks and law enforcement. We hope this is one of the measures where enforcement is not going to have to be a first resort. But if people are recalcitrant, if people are ignoring the public health measures and if fines are required, then that's going to be up to the public health officials and law enforcement to be able to make those decisions. And Dr. Hinshaw, would you add anything to that? Oh, Dana had a question about fitness as well? Yeah, sorry, I'll let you answer that then, Dr. Hinshaw.
So I was just going to comment on the question about people being able to, for example, skate on a skating rink together. And so the intention, as Minister Shandro said, is that group social activities are not allowed at this time. And again, that's defined in terms of people coming together, mixing, mingling, socializing, and spending that time together in that spot. But what we have not prohibited is the ability for people to do fitness activities. So to go for a walk, as long as there's distancing. People can skate on outdoor rinks as long as there's 2 meters of distancing between them if they're from different households. So the outdoor fitness type activities at this time, again, are not prohibited or restricted except for the requirement for distancing. And that distinction again is that we don't want people gathering together, socializing, and being in close contact. And that is exactly what the restriction is targeted at.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Our next question comes from Chris Varco of the Calgary Herald. Your line is open.
Hi, this is a question for the Premier. Premier, in the springtime, you'd said that 25,000 businesses and 300,000 jobs were affected by the lockdown then. How many businesses and how many people will be affected by this lockdown? And how quickly will you get grants out to the small businesses that are eligible to apply?
Hey, Chris, we were just chatting off camera there. We anticipate that these restrictions are going to impact approximately 30,000 businesses. That's why we've extended the relaunch grant eligibility. We believe that this will cover off the vast majority of small businesses impacted by these new health restrictions. You're correct in the earlier health measures resulted in over 300,000 job losses across Alberta. The recent numbers put the recovery at about 240,000, 250,000 jobs recovered. We're going to be paying close attention to see how these new restrictions impact jobs across the province. We're expecting it'll impact those businesses, which will then flow through to employment as well.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Our next question comes from Julia Wong of Global News. Your line is open.
Hi, this question is for the Premier. You mentioned the R value earlier, and that's the first time we've heard that number since November 21st. Experts say there's been a lack of transparency when it comes to that health data. I know you said Cabinet was looking to determine what information to release. How come Cabinet is playing any type of role when it comes to releasing health data? And how do you justify to Albertans why they are not getting data that experts say would help them better understand the spread of the virus in the province?
Thank you, Julie. Well, as I've indicated, we are preparing a public presentation on health data, including healthcare capacity. I think we should be in a position, hopefully, to present all of that next week. So we're happy to provide additional information at that time. We, in terms of healthcare capacity, have contracted third-party experts to help us come up with a standardized dashboard of key health capacity metrics that we'll be presenting. But as I say, I mean, I've heard Dr. Hinshaw talk about the estimated RT value many times. I have as well. It's not being guarded as some kind of a state secret. We share our estimates periodically. As I've said, the rate seems generally to have stabilized in the past week or two, but we always have to be vigilant that it could move upwards very quickly, and anything over one means a growth, which right now is a real problem.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Our next question comes from Alicia Corbella of Post Media. Your line is open.
Oh, hi. This is a question for, I think, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, but maybe somebody else will want to pitch in. Somebody was asked me if they have family members who live out of province, who have for a very long time had airline tickets for their loved ones to come back and spend Christmas. And this is a nuclear family, so two parents, two kids. What are you recommending there? Is that considered the same family in this circumstance?
Our current recommendation is that if there is someone who typically lives in the province as a permanent resident, so for example, someone who's a university student whose regular place of residence is Alberta, they've left to go to university, and they're coming home to their permanent home for Christmas, that would be allowed. But that if it's somebody who's coming to visit, whose place of residence, permanent residence is not Alberta, that at this time, and I recognize that this is very difficult, people have had travel plans for a while, but at the current time, our restrictions for in-home social gatherings would apply to anyone who would be coming just for that visit, who again isn't a permanent resident and coming to that permanent home. So in the example that you cite, again, I'm not sure, but if it is children who are coming home on a university break, then that would be permitted, but any other kinds of visits would not be.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Our next question comes from Janet French of CBC. Your line is open.
Hi there. My question is for the Premier and for Minister Shandro. The previous decisions to do less, to take less restrictive measures, which allowed the spread to continue, do you think that will now cost more lives and make economic recovery more difficult once restrictions are lifted?
Well, I would say that the instinct of some to shut everything down from the beginning would be devastating on the livelihoods of countless Albertans. Alberta, through most of the past 9 months, had lower levels of confirmed cases, of hospitalizations and COVID fatalities than the other large Canadian provinces, all of the US states, and almost all of the European countries, with generally less stringent restrictions. We've also seen many countries go to extreme and sustained lockdown policies. I can think of several. Peru in the Southern Hemisphere, various European countries like Italy and Spain that have had catastrophically worse health outcomes than we have here in Alberta. Quebec and Ontario have had much more stringent health restrictions from day one, which could much more accurately be characterized as lockdown-style policy settings, and yet both of those provinces have had significantly higher COVID-19 related death rates than we have had here in Alberta. So, Janet, I think you'd be making a huge mistake if you draw a simple correlation between a particular policy setting and the outcomes. The outcomes here have been, until the spike in cases in the past few weeks, have been better than the vast majority of comparable jurisdictions. Now, obviously, we are facing a surge in cases. This is a typical surge for developed, urbanized societies in the Northern Hemisphere. Alberta is colder than most other parts of the country at this time of year. Obviously, that has an impact on patterns of life and on viral spread. These are factors that we need to take into account, and we have in adopting today's measures. But I believe we've taken the prudent approach to seek to balance the competing interests of limiting COVID spread with limiting the devastating impact that restrictions have on people's lives.
Okay, we have time for 3 more. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Our next question comes from Don Braid of the Calgary Herald. Your line is open.
I'm looking for a number in the documentation. The number is 10. And I think Dean referred to social gatherings outdoors of 10 people or more, 10 people or less. But I don't see it now. So are we to assume that when we go outdoors, we can't associate with other people, if you're out walking with your partner or spouse, that you can't associate with any other people because we're all limited to that family cohort, even in outdoor situations. So that's my question. But another thing I wanted to raise was something sort of related to what Alicia asked about, which is I had a communication from a person whose family of about 12 people was planning all to quarantine for 14 days where they are and then gather for Christmas. And I presume they're all within Alberta. Would that be allowed? Those are my questions.
Thank you, Don. On the first question, yes, we're going from a 10-person limit on outdoor private social gatherings that was established 2 weeks ago today to 0 outdoor social gatherings now. Now, obviously, people in a family household cohort can enjoy the outdoors together. And I don't think any bylaw officer is going to ticket you if you say hi to your friends in passing as you pass them on the sidewalk or in the park, on the ski hill, or on an outdoor skating rink. But if you call up 20 of your closest personal friends and say, let's gather for and have some beers around the fire pit, that is definitely a social gathering. So we ask people to apply a common sense definition to what constitutes a social gathering. It's not incidentally crossing friends, family, or acquaintances while outdoors. On the second question, I'll ask Dr. Hinshaw to get that.
Thanks for the question. So I recognize there are people who may be planning those kinds of safety measures. So saying if everyone in the family stays home for 14 days and doesn't go anywhere, then could they gather for Christmas? The challenge is it's very difficult to be able to I guess, enforce that or to understand what people's definition of quarantining is that quarantining meaning they're just going to work and home and nowhere else? And so what we're doing with respect to the restrictions that we were putting in place is essentially saying to Albertans at this time, we're telling you that gathering for Christmas would be not allowed at this time, no social gatherings in the home with people who do not live in that home, recognizing that that is an imposition, that does put a significant constraint on what is typically the time of year, as was mentioned, where family do gather together and enjoy each other's company. And yet we are really concerned that if we provide those kinds of suggestions, people may define that kind of quarantine or the safety measures in a different way. And it's possible that we may see, as we saw at Thanksgiving, a significant acceleration of cases. And we're going into Christmas with a much, much higher new daily case rate than we went into Thanksgiving. And that is a big concern. So at this point, we are saying that Christmas should be celebrated with people's own household, who they live with, or if they live alone, up to 2 other people.
Operator, can you please put through the second last caller? Operator, are you there? Operator, can you put through the next caller?
Thank you. One moment, please. One moment. Thank you. The next question is from Sammy Hudis, Post Media. Please go ahead.
Hi, Premier Kenny. Approximately 1 month ago, you said that COVID fatalities represent, and I quote, a tiny proportion of deaths in our province. Since that day, around 300 more Albertans have died due to COVID-19. Hospitalizations, as you've noted, have risen from around 170 to well over 600, ICU admissions from 30 to over 100. We're the last province to implement the mask mandate, and you've resisted calls from health experts for months to enact the very measures that you've announced today, including saying that Alberta is doing the bare minimum a few weeks ago to help keep the economy running. So from a health perspective, it's clear that your approach hasn't worked to date and has arguably even cost people their lives. Do you acknowledge any responsibility and apologize for the way you've handled the second wave of the pandemic?
That sounds a lot more like an NDP speech than a media question, Sammy. I reject the entire premise of your question. First of all, we do lose about 26,000 people to deaths every year in Alberta. And what I said at that time is absolutely accurate. My point was to put that in context. And we've tried to keep everything in a balanced context throughout. In terms of masks, this was the first government in Canada to recommend mask usage when the Public Health Agency of Canada, the World Health Organization, and many media outlets, perhaps your own, were parodying the advice not to use masks. Alberta was calling for masks. When I'll remind you as well that when the federal government was responding to pressure from the World Health Organization to keep borders open from COVID hotspots, I was calling for them as a former immigration minister to be closed, as the East Asian jurisdictions did so effectively to limit spread and have the best COVID outcomes in the world. This is the only provincial government to have provided a widespread free mask program, providing tens of millions of free masks to Albertans to normalize their usage fairly early in the pandemic period. We believe that, as I quoted 2 weeks ago from former Prime Minister Sir Wilfrid Laurier, that often the sunny ways of persuasion are more effective than the harsh means of coercion. And we have happily seen a anecdotally growing number of Albertans voluntarily embracing mask usage as a way of limiting transmission. We have wanted, as I've said from the beginning, to avoid the kind of polarized politicization of mask usage that we've seen in the United States and some other parts of the world. And so I think we've taken the right track in terms of using public education, facilitation, and the earliest adoption of masks. You know, I know that you've just joined folks who are doing drive-by smears on Alberta. I will remind you that we have had through 8 of the 9 COVID months, the lowest levels of transmission, of hospitalizations, of ICU admissions, of COVID fatalities on a per capita basis of the large Canadian provinces to this date. Quebec, Ontario, and Manitoba continue to have pretty significantly higher levels of COVID-19 related fatalities. British Columbia is just a little bit behind us. I would also point out, speaking of British Columbia, that the BC, next door, with a government of a different partisan persuasion, has had a broadly very similar policy approach to Alberta. A little bit more emphasizing personal and collective responsibility, public education, as opposed to using coercive measures as the first resort. And generally, BC and Alberta have had better outcomes with respect to mortalities, hospitalizations, ICU admissions than, for example, Ontario and Quebec, which took more coercive measures more quickly. And finally, I would, just put all of this in context. While we are concerned about every fatality, all 26,000 Albertans who pass away, while we're concerned about the nearly 500 Albertans who have died of opioid overdoses this year, many of which we believe parenthetically were caused indirectly by COVID restrictions that suspended the operation of residential treatment centers and by other policy responses like the CERB payments to people coping with addiction. While all of those fatalities, whether opioid related, COVID-19 related, or other suicide related, they're all tragedies in and of themselves. We should acknowledge that, for example, you can take California, a state that has been celebrated as a lockdown state, which has encountered 278 deaths per million, hospitalizations per million compared to 137 in Alberta. And California's encountered 50 deaths per million as opposed to 14.5 in Alberta. I could run you through a comparative statistical analysis of our outcomes versus those of jurisdictions that have taken much more stringent measures. At the end of the day, we've tried to do this in a balanced way, and now it's up to Albertans to rise to the challenge during this critically important time.
Operator, can you please put through our final caller?
Yes, final question is from François Joly, Radio-Canada.
Oui, bonjour. Hi. Question en français for Prime Ministre Kenney. Monsieur Kenney, on voit 60% des chirurgies dans le Grand Mountain qui ont été annulées. On voit une pandémie dont la croissance est exponentielle depuis plusieurs semaines. Est-ce que vous, aujourd'hui, est-ce que vous regrettez d'avoir pas imposé des mesures plus sévères plus tôt?
Non, effectivement, le but de l'Alberta depuis le début de cette pandémie a été trouver un équilibre entre la protection des vies et de toute la vie sociale et économique des Albertains. Et je crois que dans les premiers 8 mois de cette pandémie, qui a duré 9 mois, on a fait très bien avec un taux de mort beaucoup plus bas que celle du Québec, de l'Ontario, du Manitoba, que tous les États aux États-Unis et presque tous les pays européens, avec moins des restrictions négatives sur notre société. Évidemment, depuis quelques semaines, nous vivons une augmentation des cas qui n'est pas supportable. C'est la raison pour laquelle nous avons mis en place de plus en plus les niveaux de protection des mesures et aujourd'hui encore plus de restrictions obligatoires. En bout de ligne, c'est aux Albertains à décider s'ils vont répondre comme une société avec un sens de solidarité tout ensemble pour protéger les vulnérables. C'est essentiel aujourd'hui. Évidemment, l'Alberta vive la même vague des nouveaux cas que presque toutes les sociétés développées dans l'hémisphère du Nord. Les pays européens, les États en Amérique, les provinces canadiennes. Et c'est un défi semblable, mais j'en suis certaine que les Albertains ils vont répondre avec un sens de responsabilité pour suivre ces nouvelles réglementations.
That concludes today's question and answer. Dr. Hinshaw will be back with another update tomorrow afternoon. Have a good night.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Good evening, I'm Ian Hannamansing. Ottawa has handed out hundreds of billions of dollars in pandemic relief, and it isn't over yet. So where did that money go? CBC News digs in and finds out from Help for Individual Canadians.
I had to lay off pretty much everybody.